27 to over the 50,000 mark. That's about 2% of the population of Gaza. Nearly 1,800 people have also been injured in the past 9 days, and they're facing increasing problems accessing medical care due to the destruction of hospitals and medical facilities. Upwards of 125,000 people have been told to move under renewed forced displacement orders. And we're seeing more forced displacement orders today, again this morning. All of this is against a near month-long siege of Gaza, which is blocking all aid and commercial supplies, including food, water, medicine, repair equipment, and other vital supplies from coming into Gaza. Vital supplies in Gaza are running out, and getting what little there is now distributed is putting humanitarian workers at risk as well from Israeli airstrikes. Literally no one and nowhere is safe now. And you're going to hear this from our panelists today. We're going to be hearing from 6 people here today. This briefing is on the record, and after brief statements by each panelist, we will open the floor up to questions. Please, can you put your questions in the Q&A box? You can see that on the bottom of the toolbox at the bottom of your screen. And when you ask a question, can you say who you would like to answer that question as well, if possible, please? Please also identify yourself and your outlet, and we will prioritise those for questions from people who have identified themselves. So thank you. With that, let's start our discussion with our first panellist, which is Clémence Lagoudard, who is Oxfam's response lead in Gaza. Clémence, you left Gaza City a few days ago and you're now in Deir al-Balah in Gaza. Can you paint a picture really of what you've seen in recent days and talk about some of the operational challenges that you and your team have been facing?
Yes, thank you very much, Belinda. So yeah, I was in Gaza City when all hell broke loose once again on the people of the Gaza Strip. I traveled back to Deir al-Balah on Friday, and since then we are trying to coordinate the humanitarian response in an extremely challenging environment. Right now, our focus is resuming critical life-saving activities, mostly trying to provide water to people. Why are we focusing on water? Is that most of the water production facilities have been destroyed or damaged since the beginning of the war, leaving little option for people to have sufficient access to quality drinking water. Right now, we are barely reaching 20 liters per person and per day, leaving people facing impossible choice to have to use the water for drinking, either for bathing or for cooking. We are already observing a surge in terms of water-related diseases because all of that is happening in a sanitary environment that is quickly deteriorating. We have sewage infrastructure that have been damaged and that we have not been able to repair, that are spilling in the streets. We have waste accumulation increasing by the day. Since the beginning, since the 18th, and since Israel has broke the ceasefire, we have lost access to more than 200 public water, sanitation, or hygiene-related facilities that are currently under the buffer zone or in new evacuation zone. We cannot access those, and we have having difficulty to respond to the new needs of people that had to move under the new evacuation forced displacement orders. What is critical also is that most of our operations right now are dependent on fuel. And as Belinda mentioned, not a single drop of fuel has entered the Gaza Strip since the 2nd of March. The entire water production sector is at risk of shutting down in the next few weeks if this solution is not resolved, if the fuel is not coming back into the Gaza Strip. That also applies through other critical sectors. Right now, we have a few asks, which is a renewed ceasefire, permanent one, but this is not the end of the ask. We need also to have humanitarian supply coming back in. We need to stop counting trucks, but we need to make sure that what comes in allow for us to do critical repairs on water infrastructure, on sewage infrastructure, so that we can stop having patches, but that we can do something that is more significant and more sustainable. And ultimately, the humanitarian population, the humanitarian actors need to be able to operate safely. We have seen a surge in critical incidents since the resumption of the hostilities. So we need this guarantee to be able to alleviate the extreme suffering of the entire Gaza population. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clemence. Next, I'd like to invite Asil Badoun to speak. Asil is Senior Advocacy and Communications Manager with Medical Aid for Palestinians. Asil, can you talk to us about the current healthcare structure in Gaza in light of recent attacks? And could you tell us what the key challenges are now facing the healthcare system in Gaza?
Yes, thank you. So I'm Asil and I'm talking from the West Bank, specifically in Ramallah. I'll just give you a very quick healthcare overview. And in the past 16 months, Israel has been systematically dismantling the healthcare system with almost attacking every hospital, leaving no fully functioning hospitals to serve a population facing starvation, hundreds and thousands of injured people or people who are basically ill. So Gaza's hospitals, already devastated by the months of the systematic attacks, cannot cope with the influx of trauma patients. And I'm just now getting reports from doctors saying that hospitals are nothing but hospitals. They're offering only the most basic medical care, which isn't enough in these difficult times with mass casualties arriving. And doctors are forced to decide which cases to prioritize. I know doctors working with us, they feel guilty. They can't sleep at night because they had to decide who lives and who dies, because literally they don't have what it takes to save lives. So they're not sure if the surgeries are going to be successful due to the acute shortage of medical supplies because of the Israeli siege. And even if people don't die of their injuries, even if they manage to do the surgery, they will die later on from infection, dehydration, or simply lack of basic healthcare. So our teams in Gaza, they're witnessing horrific scenes of suffering, hospitals overwhelmed, patients treated on the floor, and entire families are being killed while they're sleeping. And just to give you an overview of the functionality of hospitals, only 13 out of 35 are completely out of service, and only 22 are partially functioning. And as you know, Israel has been targeting healthcare workers with more than 1,000 killed and hundreds detained, and many have been killed in the prison. So we're talking about shortages of medical supplies, medical workers being displaced, homeless, losing loved ones. And also our medical teams, now they're getting more restricted in terms of their access to Gaza. And with the continued Israeli aid blockade, we are witnessing a catastrophic scene in the healthcare in Gaza. There are many ventilators and incubators much needed that they cannot enter due to the blockade. And more than 10,000 patients need to be evacuated as urgently as possible, but Israel is not allowing their evacuation. So I don't know what to say, but in terms of the situation in Gaza, we have lost words to describe what does it mean to be a patient or a doctor at the moment in Gaza.
Thank you, Asil. I think they all stick with us. Doctors not sleeping at night because they're worried about whose lives they're going to have to choose to save or not. That's just so tragic to hear that. The acute challenges, of course, around medical care in Gaza really can't be understated at the moment. We're joined now by Dr. Feroz Sidwar, who is a California-based general trauma and critical surgeon based in Khan Yunis in Gaza, and he's volunteering with Med Global at the Nasser Hospital. Dr. Feroz, we deeply appreciate you joining us today. I know you're very busy. I know your presence is very much dependent on being able to step away from what must be tremendously difficult work at the moment. Could you describe to us, please, what you're seeing and how you are responding?
Yeah, on the morning of the 18th, when the bombing resumed, we had a huge mass casualty event at Nasser. I was a resident during the Boston Marathon bombing, and that was the biggest mass casualty event I had ever seen until I came to Gaza last year. but this one was the biggest one I've ever seen overall. I think Nasser saw something like 280 patients in about 4 or 5 hours. I myself did 6 operations in about 5 hours. Just to give context, because numbers are hard to understand sometimes. In the entire city of Boston has 6 level 1 trauma centers, and all 6 of them together saw 129 patients on the day of the Boston Marathon bombing. Just this one hospital with 386 beds saw 200 something people on March 18th. There was another mass casualty on March 19th. The 20th and 21st were relatively quiet. I think we only did 1 or 2 trauma operations a day. But ever since then, it's very steadily escalated. And I'm sure everybody knows on March 23rd, Nasser Medical Complex was actually bombed directly in order to kill some guy. Actually, I was almost killed in that bombing. There were 2 people killed. One was apparently the intended target. I think his name is Ismail Barhoum, but the other was a 16-year-old boy named Ibrahim Barhoum. I think they were related somehow. And he was my patient. I'd operated on him on March 18th when the bombing had resumed. Had repaired his colon and given him a colostomy, and he was actually going to go home on March 24th. And so I was headed down to the surgical ward, the men's surgical ward, which on the set we used to be on the 2nd floor, to change his bandages and just talk to his family and tell them what to expect when they go home, how to keep him clean, things like that, what he should eat, any just simple questions that people have when they're going to be discharged. And the only reason I wasn't standing next to him when he was blown up is because one of the ICU doctors said, "Hey, can you come help me with this bleeding patient in the ICU?" So I did. We looked at him for about 10 minutes, and then I was decided to take him to the operating room. And while they were setting that up, I was going to go back down. I said, "Okay, let me go change Ibrahim's dressings now," and that's when the bomb happened. So that's not good. I would prefer not to be blown up while providing medical care to people. And happy to take any questions, I suppose.
How long have you been there for now, Dr. Feroz?
I got here on March 6th, so I was here before the ceasefire, quote unquote, ended, and I'll be here until April 1st.
I'm sure there are I've got lots of questions for you. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for you when we open up the floor to questioning as well. So thank you very much for that. Next, I'm going to ask Alexandra Say from Save the Children to speak to us. Alex, the conditions being faced by people in Gaza are unimaginably difficult. For children, these conditions are particularly devastating, with lifelong implications, both mentally and physically. Can you talk about how the war is affecting children, especially in terms of nutrition and lack of access to food during crucial growth periods?
Thank you for having me. Since the resumption of hostilities, children are back to being killed, sleeping in their tents, they're being starved, and they're being attacked. Save the Children has 2 health clinics, one in Khan Yunis, one in Deir al-Balah. And during the pause, we saw nearly 4,000 malnourished children who we were helping come back to a healthy weight. A lot of these children, a lot of these 4,000 children were newborns, children who were born during the war, born into malnourishment. Overall, we were getting around 300 people a day coming into our clinics to receive support for malnutrition and illnesses. And since the resumption of hostilities last week, the numbers of people coming into our clinics has massively reduced. This means that children and breastfeeding mothers are not receiving the nutrients that they need to survive. Just to give you an example, every Monday and Wednesday, our clinics are open for women and girls in Deir al-Balah. And this week we had no women and girls come in because they're too afraid to move around. This is incredibly dangerous. It means that women and girls are not receiving the support that they need. Many of the mothers that our teams meet are malnourished. They are unable to breastfeed. This may have lifelong consequences on the newborns, and maternal malnutrition directly impacts fetal development. It leads to low birth weight. It leads to stunting. It also leads to cognitive impairments for children that can last a lifetime. Just to give you one story, one of my colleagues met a mother who whose house was destroyed in an airstrike. Her daughter and herself were stuck under the rubble. She was a few months pregnant. This led to a premature birth. Her child was on the brink of death. The child had to receive intensive care and was born malnourished. It was our services that provided a lifeline for that child. These are the kinds of examples of children and mothers who are not receiving the care that they need because of the resumption in hostilities. The forced displacement orders that have been issued, these are death sentences for children who are not able to get the nutrients that they need. Children who have lost their limbs are immobile, they're not able to flee. And we know that crutches and wheelchairs are things that are not able to get into Gaza because of the Israeli government's total blockade on aid, which has lasted now about three weeks. When Save the Children does distribute food and supplies in Gaza, we see massive crowds because every single person in Gaza is reliant on aid just to survive. And the blockade over the last 3 weeks means that that lifeline has been completely cut. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Alex. We're going to come back to you with questions when we've gone through all the panelists. Next, we're going to look at how the ongoing war in Gaza is impacting mental health. Dr. Yasser Abu Jami, Director General of the Gaza Community Mental Health Programme, has joined us to speak on this. Dr. Yasser, the figures of people injured and killed in Gaza are staggering, but then there's also the invisible injuries, the mental trauma that this war has inflicted on people, particularly children in Gaza. What can you tell us about that?
Thank you very much, Belinda, and good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. Let's remember that on the 17th of January, that was 2.5 months ago, that hundreds of thousands of people who were already exposed to multiple traumatic events, experiences, and to multiple displacements for more than 15 months were already trying to get back to their homes. And let's say that they were facing the reality of their neighborhoods, of their destroyed houses for the first time. They had heard some news, they had seen some photos of those, houses, but they never thought that the reality would be so grim and so terrible. When they faced the reality, they had really to accommodate to the destroyed houses, to accommodate to the new life that they are going to live through. However, less than 2 months later, on the 18th of March, everyone in Gaza Strip, when the airstrikes that the surprising airstrikes that took place in Gaza, they were so devastated, the people, that most of them felt that the 15 months of war, they just were happening in front of their eyes one more time. Some of the people even were talking about this is similar to what happened even earlier in 2014 and in 2008. In short, the memories of the ongoing war, the memories of the previous wars were occurring and happening again in people's mind, and children are not an exception to that. GCMHP teams that are working in Gaza City and the middle areas and the news reported that children were showing sleeping problems, nightmares, bedwetting, and many of them were showing intense fear, crying, sadness, concentration difficulties, and sometimes aggressive behavior. Let's remember that in many cases, children found themselves, being responsible for their care and for the care of their brothers and sisters, because either the father or mother, they just got injured, or because of the reality that they need really to put some energy and help their parents with just living issues like bringing water, and that made recovery paths even more and more difficult. Parents were not also at their best. They were also showing various symptoms of trauma, of PTSD, avoiding to talk about the traumatic events, difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping, night terrors also. But it was notable that there are many negative thoughts, feeling of guilt, feeling of embarrassment, pessimism about the future, and sometimes suicidal thoughts, and sometimes mothers were really almost finding it extremely difficult just to take care of their babies and even of their infants. The situation is extremely painful. People are devastated, and I'm not sure what's going to happen next. Again, glad to hear questions.
Great, thank you very much. Really appreciate that, Dr. Abu Jami. Our next speaker is Gavin Kelleher. He's Humanitarian Access Manager with the Norwegian Refugee Council. Gavin, we're witnessing mass forced displacement across Gaza with more orders again this morning. Where are people going? What can they take with them? And what shelter materials are available to support them?
Thanks very much. Talking to you from Deir al-Balah in Gaza here. In terms of displacement, what we're seeing here on the ground is that since the ceasefire collapsed, at least 15% of Gaza has now been issued with relocation directives by Israeli forces. We saw at least 140,000 people displaced in the first 7 days following the collapse of the ceasefire alone, and those numbers continue to increase. Further relocation directives were issued just a couple of hours ago. These were in Gaza City. They're impacting my own colleagues who right now are deciding where to go. They're fleeing with their children, with elderly parents. They have absolutely no idea where they should be going because, of course, there's no safe place in Gaza, and Palestinians in general have nowhere safe to go. And there's not even a pretense of a safe place in Gaza anymore. For Palestinians here on the ground, it's also not very clear to them sometimes whether or not these relocation directives are actually impacting the sites or the neighborhoods that they're in. They're not being communicated with any clarity. And there's a massive amount of confusion and utter disbelief that this is still being allowed to happen to them. Increasingly, what we're seeing is that Palestinians are completely unable to displace at all. Despite the relocation directives being issued for the places in which they're in, they have exhausted now all of their coping mechanisms for displacement. They can't afford to hire any support to help move. They can't even afford to rent donkey carts now to cross back into South Gaza. I just heard from someone an hour ago. It's becoming completely out of control, and they have no ability to displace. As displacement sites themselves are becoming full, they're having to turn people away. My colleague spoke to somebody in Khan Yunis who told them that a new family was arriving at the displacement site every 5 minutes as people were fleeing. We've also seen people displaced twice already in the past week alone. In terms of what people are bringing with them, it's essentially just what they can carry. But if you've got a baby, if you've got children, if you've got elderly parents, if you've got a disabled relative, of course you can't carry anything at all. So people are arriving in utter destitution. In terms of the shelter needs here in Gaza, more than 1 million people remain in dire need of tents in Gaza, and 700,000 more require very basic items like plastic sheets and ropes to reinforce their currently inadequate makeshift shelters and the damaged buildings in which they're in. Because of these massive needs and because 1 million people still need tents, we were in a situation now where as many as 10 people at a time are trying to fit inside a single tent. We have people sheltering in the corridors of crowded school buildings and in the shadows of collapsed buildings as people try to put absolutely anything between themselves and the sky at night. Most concerningly, we still have many of those without any alternative shelter, staying in structurally unsound, dangerous, damaged buildings, and we continue to sadly see incidents where these damaged buildings are collapsing on top of the men, children, and women underneath them because of a lack of alternative. The shelter situation in Gaza is an entirely manufactured crisis. 92% of people's homes here have been damaged or destroyed through military violence, and humanitarian actors have consistently not been allowed to bring in the supplies we've been calling for now for 17 months. Given the total ongoing siege in Gaza, we're seeing the shelter response approaching a complete standstill because we have almost nothing left to distribute, despite still seeing these massive forced transfers happening every day, sometimes multiple times a day. And we as humanitarian actors are also being massively undermined in our ability to respond to this crisis here on the ground because the Israeli forces are refusing to give us security assurances or safety assurances to move around in Gaza at the same time as launching attacks directly on humanitarian facilities that they are very well aware of. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. What's the weather like? What's the conditions like at the moment? Talking about shelter in Gaza, what are the conditions at the moment?
So we're still seeing very cold evenings here. There have been days in the last couple of days, complete downpours of rain. If you have nothing to protect yourself from that, obviously your few possessions that you have left get wet, and people are getting sick because they're not able to protect themselves from the continued rain and cold.
Right, thank you very much. So thank you very much to all of our panelists. I'm now going to open the floor to questions. And just to remind you that when asking a question, please can say who you'd like to direct the question to, and please identify yourself and the name of your media outlet as well. And the first question I've got here is from Louis Badwan Laman from AFP to Alex. Alex at Save the Children. Could you speak a bit more generally, Alex, on the detail from the UN? Sorry, the question here is, are your team seeing many more instances of children injured by unexploded ordnances in Gaza at the moment?
Thank you. Our teams, when they go around Gaza, see unexploded ordnance all the time. Gaza is littered with them. This is not just causing injuries, but it's also impacting the ability of aid organizations to deliver assistance safely and any hope for recovery. We don't have new figures on children that are injured, but just to emphasize, the injuries that our teams are seeing are catastrophic. Just a few weeks ago, our teams conducted an assessment in southern Gaza and found that one of the top 3 needs was wheelchairs. So that gives you an indication of the kinds of injuries that are facing not just children, but their families as well. The UNMAS has warned that 5 to 10% of weapons fired into Gaza have failed to detonate. So that also gives you an indication of what kinds of how littered Gaza is by unexploded ordnance. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Perhaps Dr. Feroz Sidwa, I could also ask you that question. Dr. Feroz Sidwa, as I said earlier, he's currently volunteering for Med Global at the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. Have you seen many children coming in with injuries from unexploded ordnance? Is that something you've been dealing with in your time in Gaza?
It's hard to know exactly, actually, because a lot of the especially before the 18th, a lot of the injuries that we were seeing were from buildings collapsing on people when they would try to go back into them to retrieve the bodies of their loved ones, to retrieve their possessions. Actually, the first operation I did here was a maybe 23 or 24-year-old guy who he went back to his destroyed, I don't know if it was an apartment or a home, but he was searching through the rubble for the body of his father, which he knew was buried there, and then the building collapsed on him. It tore his kidney off his aorta, so I had to, he lived. He's fine now. But those kinds of injuries are actually pretty frequent here. Whether those people are crawling through buildings and discovering unexploded ordnance, and then it's exploding, and that's what leading to the building collapsing, who knows? It's very hard to know such things in detail, but yeah, it's a major problem, exactly like Alexandra said.
Okay, I've got another couple of questions for you, Dr. Feroz, as well, while we've got you there. What was your personal motivation to come to Gaza and to help people in Gaza? What drove you?
It's a long story, I suppose, but I do humanitarian work all over the world. I worked in Ukraine 3 times since the Russian invasion. I was in Burkina Faso and last year in Gaza before that. I've worked in the West Bank. I've worked in Haiti. I've worked in Zimbabwe. So I'm not Palestinian. I'm not Muslim. I'm not Christian or Jewish or Israeli. I don't really. My family's from a small ethnic minority in India, so I don't have any real connection to the conflict other than being an American. That's it. Just I think what my government's doing here is wrong. So just trying to make up for it. It's a little short version.
Having been there now for a few weeks, what's the greatest need of supplies? What supplies is in greatest need in the hospital?
So it depends. Nasser, where I am, is the biggest functioning hospital in Gaza. Shifa is a bigger hospital technically, but its bed capacity is dramatically reduced now. Functionally, I think this hospital has about 480 beds, 380 in the actual building, and then another 80 or so outside in the WHO tents. So right now we have the supply here. I can really only comment on Nasser, unfortunately, but We have the supplies needed to perform hemorrhage control, meaning like life-saving operations in the immediate trauma situation. We are running out of the supplies, the surgical supplies, and the medications needed to care for just normal medical problems that people have. You know, just because someone drops a bomb on you doesn't mean you're not going to get appendicitis or cholecystitis or colon cancer or anything else. So dealing with normal medical problems has become very, very challenging. And the hospital, it's unfortunate, but they're doing the best they can. But they've had to start triaging supplies. So people who are getting planned elective surgeries. So like Dr. Mark Perlmutter is a hand surgeon here who came in with me, and he's doing nerve repairs and tendon transfers, but they're not letting him give his patients preoperative antibiotics, which would really help. And that's the kind of the standard of care. But they're saying we have to reserve the antibiotics for the trauma patients that are likely to come in. And then just over my shoulder, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a burned out building over there. That's the hospital's old warehouse, but it was destroyed in February and March when the Israelis raided and occupied this hospital. And so the hospital can't even keep a strategic reserve of supplies. So the situation is quite bad. If we keep having mass casualty events like we did on the 18th and 19th, and then if we continue having the kind of continuous run of trauma that we've had since the 23rd, or actually since the 22nd, and certainly if the Israelis keep bombing the hospital, then we will very soon be out of supplies and the ability to help people.
But obviously, this is, like you say, the doctors are up at night, they can't sleep at night, so what about patients and whose lives you can change? How is the morale overall with the healthcare workers who've gone through such, it's been months and months? How is the morale?
It's bad, that's for sure. But the Palestinians, I'll tell you, I have never, and this is including the Boston Marathon, where the severity was just far, far lower than what we dealt with on the 18th. I have never seen a more professionally run mass casualty event than what I saw on March 18th, and it was run by a 33. I'm 43, like I'm kind of midway into my career. This was run by Khalid Al-Ser. He's a well-known Palestinian trauma surgeon. He's only 2 years out of residency, and 6 months of that was spent in a prison being tormented. And he ran the best mass casualty event I've ever seen run in my life. It was absolutely incredible. So they're motivated. They want to help these people. They want to help their patients. They want to be part of their profession. They want to do what they can, but they know that their abilities are being deliberately degraded, and they feel alone. I mean, I'm here. Some other folks are here, but hi, buddy. He's just gonna hang it. Sorry, but you can wait. But yeah, we just don't. They feel alone. They feel abandoned by the world, and I think rightly so. I mean, if when Russia bombs the children's hospital in Kiev, everybody loses their mind, and rightly so. And again, just to be clear, I've worked in Ukraine 3 times since the Russian invasion. I actually knew a couple that was at that hospital with their daughter when it happened. It's not a joke, but what's going on here is far more severe, and they see that the world, and especially the West, just doesn't seem to care, and that's actually more so than the attack. I think that's what's hurting it.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got a question here for Clemence. Clemence, can you tell us how many wells have had to shut down, and how many are still operating? Are the wells and the only partially operating desalination plants now the main sources of water?
So yeah, I mean, right now, in terms of the number of it's difficult to track down because most of them are in the buffer zone, so that we don't have access to them. And as every time there is a forced displacement order, we are losing access to it. So the situation is degrading every day. And I think the well is there, but then you need a generator, you need fuel to run the generator to be able to produce water, knowing that this water normally needs additional treatment to make sure that people can actually drink it safely. So we are losing this production capacity every day, and it's increasingly concerning. Why it's also difficult to track down is because we are right now using private wells from independent people that are making it available to increase the water production. What I can tell you is, overall 280 public facilities most of them providing water, we lost access to them since the 18th. And yes, so overall the desalination plant and the wells are where the water is coming from. There are the water coming from Israel through the Make Road line. One of them has been down since the ceasefire. There is a breakage in it within the buffer zone, and all the coordination requests to be able to do repair have been denied by the Israeli. So what we are trying to do right now is to patch that. So when we are losing water production on one side, we are trying to increase it on the other side through these additional means of wells, of desal units. But if we don't have fuel coming in, and if we are not able to do extensive repair through equipment coming in, we are not able to continue running after the water production. Oxfam has more than 85 tons of wash and fittings that are stuck in Jordan that have been, even if accepted, returned back at the border. So we are trying our best, but we are keep on being impeded, and the blockage has been systematic for months now.
Okay. Of course, you mentioned the lack of fuel coming in for the desalination plant as well to keep that going. What sort of timing are you looking at here? How long can you keep going?
It's not a number that is coming out. I mean, we are talking weeks. Right now, the Gaza is under the longest blockade since the beginning of the war, since October 2023. It's 24 days and counting, and the reality is quite grim. There is not any positive sign that things are going to resume, or kind of the best case scenario we are running now is this privatization of aid, completely dismissing all humanitarian principle, where we will have no control whatsoever in terms of what comes in and if it's fit for purpose and who will be able to access it. So we are very looking at a critical scenario, and I think soon, I'm still talking about weeks, but soon we will be talking in terms of days.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got a question here for Gavin. Gavin, could you speak more about how the deconfliction process with Israeli forces is currently working or not working?
Sure. So in the extreme hostilities that were happening prior to the ceasefire beginning, humanitarian organizations were able to share our planned movements with Israel in advance to assist Israel in fulfilling its obligations under international humanitarian law not to hit us with military violence. This is a standard humanitarian notification system that takes place right the way across the world in different conflict settings. Since the ceasefire collapsed, however, Israeli forces are telling us that there is no need for us to share our movements in advance with them in most parts of Gaza, and they're refusing to give us formal acknowledgements that they know I am getting in a car tomorrow, driving to a displacement site and delivering assistance. And that's despite the level of violence we're seeing in Gaza now being massive and indiscriminate, and despite multiple requests for them to reactivate this urgently needed humanitarian notification system. The other aspect of this is for humanitarian facilities. We share the locations of them in advance, and this has been a longer-standing practice in Gaza. And Israel acknowledges the locations. They know that these are humanitarian facilities, yet we continue to see them being hit in military violence.
I've got another question for you, Gavin, on that as well. Are you seeing more refusals of entry for aid workers? And are you seeing the space for aid workers shrinking with the blockade? We've had 8 aid workers killed in the past week alone, and with the UN reducing its footprint.
Yeah, so in the period over the last couple of months, we've seen increasing rejections impacting aid workers attempting to deploy into Gaza. This has been without any justifications given. These are for vital, direly needed humanitarian staff. We already don't have enough aid workers in Gaza to enable this response to be delivered, but still we continue to see people who might have worked here for the last 6 months or the last year being arbitrarily rejected without justification from the Israeli side. In terms of humanitarian space, I look around and ask you what space. There is almost nothing left. We have no agency, autonomy, and we're being set up to fail as a humanitarian response. We've never been allowed to bring in enough supplies. We're not being allowed to move around safely, and we're not being able to meet the needs of people.
You mentioned as well, of course, the forced displacement is affecting your colleagues as well, forcing them to move. What impact is that having on the work that they can do, and also on their morale as well, because they want to be assisting? That's what they're there for.
been a massive psychological shift in Gaza, and I think other colleagues can talk about this as well, particularly towards resignation. People have given up hope that there is any help coming for them and are in utter disbelief that this is still continuing. In terms of the day-to-day, it's extremely difficult for us to ask colleagues who are going through displacement, who are going through this siege, to carry on with their day-to-day jobs. But I should say that there are many Palestinians in Gaza that are keeping this response going, and they are working determinedly to make sure that happens, including many of my own colleagues. And without them, we would not be able to even do the little we are still able to achieve.
Thank you. I've got a question here for Asil. Asil, with the complete blockade for medicine and humanitarian goods, what's the current estimate at the moment that medical centres and humanitarian organisations will be fully out of supplies? What sort of time frame we're looking at?
So the time frame is still uncertain, as every day they announce, for example, that they have enough fuel for a few hours, sometimes for 24 hours, and then they manage to get fuel from other organizations that they still have reserves. So it's very uncertain, and from time to time they get fuel from, for example, hospital can support other hospitals, but in general they run very low on fuel, and they keep living this horror that they will get off generators very soon.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got another question here for Alex from Save the Children. Alex, Gaza now has a very large number of amputee children. Is anything being done for them? And do we know how they're faring in the current conditions, and what are their needs? You mentioned wheelchairs earlier.
Thank you. The situation for children who have lost their limbs is absolutely catastrophic, not only because they don't have the medical care needed to survive, but prosthetics, wheelchairs, crutches are not being allowed into Gaza. Nothing is being allowed into Gaza at the moment. And what I think is important to emphasize about children who are amputees, child amputees, is that they require specialized care, long-term care, to be able to grow, and that's just not available in Gaza. Children who require prosthetics, they're growing, so they need multiple prosthetics of different sizes. Gaza is not a place where this is possible. The therapeutic centers, the rehabilitative care centers, these have all been destroyed. And so children who have lost their limbs face a very grim future in Gaza. I mentioned wheelchairs being one of the top 3 needs in the South. Our partners have heard of cases where children are so malnourished that they're not able to heal from their wounds. So that gives you an indication of how badly they need that care.
Okay, I've got a question here to put to a few of the panelists, actually. Are some of you as NGOs considering reducing the presence of staff in Gaza, as the UN announced, because of the security situation? Perhaps, Alex, if I could come to you, and then come to Gavin, and come to Clemence on that as well.
The situation in Gaza for aid workers is the most dangerous of any crisis in the world. We have seen more aid workers killed in Gaza than any other conflict. Every organization in Gaza, aid group in Gaza, is taking more risks than they take in other crises, in other conflicts. We are seeing aid facilities continue to be attacked at a frequency that is not seen in other crises, despite the fact that locations of aid facilities are known to the parties. The drawdown in the UN's footprint is a result of the repeated refusal to keep aid facilities safe. It is an impossible choice that the UN has been forced to make, and it will have an impact on aid groups like Save the Children and others' ability to coordinate and to deliver services at scale.
Thank you, Gavin. Could I come to you perhaps on that?
Yeah, I think when you deploy to Gaza, it means that you make a calculation yourself. You're balancing the moral imperative for you to try to do your best to meet the needs of people in needs and to help Palestinians in Gaza. But you have some basic expectations. You don't expect to be targeted, and you expect to be able to help. So as we've seen the increasing access constraints and the inability of most humanitarian organizations to operate at the scale they need, at the same time seeing this increase in attacks, increase in high collateral violence, the outcome necessarily has been that a number of organizations have to make the decision to reduce their footprint, at least maintaining critical staff here, but not having anyone that doesn't absolutely need to be here, because that cost-benefit analysis of the risking your lives is no longer measurable. We're not able to deliver, for the most part, the amount that we need to.
Clémence, Roxfam?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what my colleagues have said. I think otherwise also the message is that we had an increase, all of us, of staff during the ceasefire, because there was a surge in terms of humanitarian assistance, because we had more access than before, and because we were able to operate at higher scale. Like right now, we are reducing the footprint, but we are reducing the footprint to go back to when we were operating under fire. So I think it's also important to that link, like, the scale and the people departing the Gaza Strip is because we are forced to go back to core operation, to go back to core position, because as Gavin and Alex mentioned, there is a balance and benefit risk calculation that is ongoing.
Okay, I've got a follow-up question, something you mentioned earlier, Clémence, about privatization of aid. Could you speak a little bit more about what's happened with the privatization of aid, and are private aid deliveries being allowed into Gaza since the blockade has been imposed?
So no, again, when we are talking about blockade, and I just want to make it very clear, is that nothing has entered. There has been no exception whatsoever, whatever the type of good, whatever the type of assistance, whatever, nothing. So there is nothing that has entered since the 2nd of March. Privatization of aid is something that has been floating around for months now, brought by the Israeli, in order to increase the control on who receives what enters, and basically to play a political agenda. This is something that all the organizations around this table are completely against. Because we are working with humanitarian principle that make sure that the people that we assist are the people that are the most in need in an independent way. So this is something that has been floating around, and one of the main concerns is that what we've seen in this war is that ideas are being floated around for a while, up until they become kind of acceptable, or up until we are forced to kind of go with it, because this is basically the only option that is there.
So you're saying there hasn't been privatization of aid, is that something under discussion?
It's something that is, it's something that is regularly brought back on the table.
And what would that mean on a daily basis? Privatization, what would that mean for people in Gaza, privatization of aid?
That means that the criteria for receiving assistance will be based on not on the humanitarian principle, so there will be no transparency on who gets the assistance. It means that the assistance could be conditioned on people moving to certain location, so therefore reinforcing forcibly displacement. It means that the assistance coming in will not be based on the needs of the population necessarily. It also means that, I mean, we are all here around this table, we are all professional, we are coming from organizations that have years and years of experience, that know how to implement programs in this kind of context. You start putting that on a private company, I mean, the drive will not be to assist people, the drive will be to make money out of it, and they will be trying things that are new for them. So these has, like, I mean, there are even more risks that I can say right now, but these are the main ones.
Okay, as you say, nothing at all, nothing whatsoever has come in since March the 2nd. So what are the most pressing requests from Gaza at the moment? Is it the ceasefire? Is it food? What are the most pressing requests you're hearing?
I mean, I can start, but I think right now we have to make impossible choices. Everything is needed. When you have 2.2 million people that are living on whatever came for 42 days and have been deprived of of assistance, of anything coming for 24 days, the needs are across sector. I mean, based on the level of destruction, based on what people have to live through every day. Yeah, I think it's extremely hard right now to prioritize. It's food, it's medical supply, it's hygiene kits, it's shelter items. It's also not basic items, but things that are enabling to have a bit more of a sustainable solution. Right now, we are working day for day. When we distribute one food kit, it will cover, what, 2 weeks, a month of needs of the people. We need also to restart the livelihood sector. People need to be able to grow food again in Gaza. Like, we need to bring back dignity for people and to limit their reliance on the humanitarian assistance when we know that the humanitarian assistance can be cut like that from one day to the other.
Thank you. I've got a question here for Dr. Yassir. Dr. Yassir, what does the destruction of health infrastructure mean for mental health care? What's needed most urgently to address this mental health crisis?
Well, I think the most needed thing and urgently is to have a ceasefire. You know, everyone is really terrified. Everyone is scared. We have seen the stories. Tents are being bombed. Nasser Hospital was bombed. Every place is not a safe place. And let's remember that most of the children who are in Gaza Strip now, more than 1 million children, they are just in areas, they are living near their houses, they are jumping around, looking around and seeing nothing but destruction. You know, Gaza Strip was already a very crowded place with more than, I think, 5,600 people per square kilometer. Most of the children, when they were returning to their areas, to their camps, they didn't find not only their houses, but they didn't even find a space to put their tents or to just stay in a place. And despite all of that, they hear the bombardment. Despite all of that, they are receiving evacuation orders. So at least to begin from, there is a need for a ceasefire. There is a need for a permanent ceasefire that tells people, okay, now you can just get rid of your fears. You need to calm down. You need to allow to rebuild yourself, not only physically, not only material part of it, but also the emotional part of it. People for the last 16 months or 18 months, they haven't had the time to just reprocess the traumas that they have endured. They haven't had time to mourn the people who were killed. They haven't had the time to deal with a child who just lost his hand or lost his leg, became amputated. And these are not hundreds of children. 20,000 children, according to some reports, have lost one or both of their parents. We have thousands of children who just lost a limb. You know, we are going to end up with a society that has the most amputated children in the world. You know, so in order to just go on with your life, you need just to have some sort of calmness. We are in a situation that we see a society that their basic needs are almost equal to the needs of fulfillment of, like, let me say, self-actualization. If you ask someone in a safe country, what do you need to self-actualize? He would say, I would need to have some dignity. I need to feel myself, to feel that I'm a responsible person, etc., etc. And that's now literally the very basic thing that no one really feels in Gaza. People are not in control of anything. They are just waiting for the day they die. That's the basic thing, you know. We either die or it's going to happen. And it's a very grim reality.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We've got 5 minutes left. I've got a few more questions in, but if anyone wants to put a question in, please do so in the Q&A chat. I've got a question here for Asil. With Gaza's last specialized cancer hospital destroyed last week, what does this mean for cancer patients? And do you have any numbers on how many cancer patients are likely currently in Gaza?
Thank you for this question, as it was the only facility for cancer patients in Gaza, serving around 30,000 Palestinians with cancer patients. But actually, it was partially destroyed, not this month, but a year ago, and people were getting very minimal services in south of Gaza in another hospital. But now there is no hope for these patients to get any specialized treatment anymore. And what we're looking for is a very grim future in terms of treatment, as most of these cancer patients have not got any treatment since the start of the war. They were only getting very basic painkillers when it was available. But for now, after the full destruction of the Turkish hospital, we're looking at 30,000 patients with no treatment.
Did you say 30 or 13?
30.
30,000 patients with no treatment. Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Feroz, if I come back to you, are there still new volunteers, doctors coming into Gaza anymore?
Yes, there are. There's been a rumor circulating on the internet that all medical teams were told to leave and that no new ones were being allowed in, but that's not true. We received more today. I can confirm that for sure. So that's a big relief because yeah, that's a big relief. No, new doctors are coming, thankfully.
Okay, and how long are you there for?
I'm here until April 1st. Actually, if I can just add something to that one thing. So the way that emergency medical teams work now is that we fly. So our organizations give COGAT our names and they look us up and they give us pre-approval, which literally 100% of people receive. Then we fly. We take 5 weeks off of work. We fly to Amman. We stay in Amman for about 36, 48 hours. And then 12 hours, in our case, it was 6 hours, literally 12 hours before you're set to cross into Gaza, you get final approval. In the case of my team, 3 out of the 5 doctors were denied. One was a 78-year-old man with 2 knee replacements. One was a 100-pound woman who also happens to be an American veteran. And yet I was allowed in. It's completely arbitrary and ridiculous. And so even though EMT teams are being allowed in, it's nowhere near the capacity that's actually needed. Furthermore, because the hostilities have resumed, now the UN is saying that, sorry, I shouldn't say the UN. Now that hostilities have resumed, whoever it is that transports us from the UN compound in, I think it's in Khan Yunis, to the Kerem Shalom crossing, is saying that we have to move in armored vehicles, and that limits things severely because there aren't very many of them and they're quite small, et cetera, et cetera. So, so these logistical challenges, I feel like are being weaponized a bit in order to keep people out or to keep the pace of people coming in to a minimum. So if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes. So Gavin, perhaps I can come to you. What's the situation with bakeries currently? We've heard a lot about bakeries closing. Are they working at the moment? And are they being forced to do a lack of fuel? Is that impacting them again?
Yeah, so the main issue with bakeries in the initial period after the siege kicked in was the lack of cooking gas. So a number of bakeries had to shut down altogether, despite warnings that that would be the case. We still have around 16 bakeries operating in Gaza using diesel generators. Of course, no fuel is coming in, so that diesel stock is depleting. And now we understand we only have 4 more days of flour left to keep these bakeries operational. So by Sunday, there will be no bread production happening in the large part of Gaza, which is a vital staple food for people here.
Right, yeah. 4 days. So if this Sunday you think it's going to run out, there's only 4 days of flour left.
Yeah, for bread production in bakeries, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I've got another question here for Dr. Yasser. Dr. Yasser, could you just give a clarification on the estimate of the number of children who've lost limbs, I think was mentioned?
Yeah, there was a report that was issued, I think, at the end of 2024, and it was like between 3,000 and 4,000, sorry. So we're not talking about hundreds, between 3,000 and 4,000 children who have lost 1 or 2 of their limbs.
3,000 to 4,000 children. Thank you very much. Okay. And just finally to the panelists, if I could just quickly go around to all of you and ask if there's any people that you have crossed paths with whose stories have stuck with you particularly to share today. So perhaps I could start with you, Dr. Yasser. Is there any particular one story of a person you have met or heard of or spoken to from Gaza or Palestine that stuck with you particularly?
Well, we have put some stories in the our 2 reports that were issued by the Gaza Committee Military Program. I call people to just look at those stories. I think I could recall 2 stories. One of them is a very dramatic one of someone who was released from the Israeli prisons. He was like, staying in prison, and on the way back to Gaza, of course, he never knew what happened to his family, what happened to his children. And it was so devastating that he just came to know that all of his family members were killed. He was the only one that was alive. And he had to live with this thing. He was released to the southern areas of Gaza Strip for the ceasefire that happened in January. And we tried to work with him, but it was beyond imagination how you could help really such a person. There are many stories of children. Some of them, they continue to have the smell of blood in their nose. They keep smelling what happened. They keep the like feeling that the traumatic events are happening again and again. And these are very traumatizing. But I would like to invite people to look at the two reports that are on our website, gcmhp.org.
Great, thank you very much. Perhaps I come to Alex. Alex, are there any particular stories that stuck with you that really you'd like to highlight?
I was talking to my colleague in Gaza just this morning, and she was saying that she was telling me about what mothers in Gaza have told her about how traumatized their children are. And one mother told her that her 12-year-old son had to pick off the remains of a baby off a tree after an explosive weapon slung the baby onto a tree. Another mother told her that her child has witnessed dogs eating bodies in Gaza, and now the child suffers from bedwetting and nightmares. The emotional impact on children over the last 17 months is, immeasurable. It's catastrophic. It will have potentially irreparable mental harm on children in Gaza, and their ability to kind of thrive in the future.
Thank you. Gavin, I think you've been in Gaza for about a year now. Any particular story that's life that sticks with you particularly you'd like to highlight?
I think every Palestinian you speak to in Gaza, unfortunately, has a horrific story to tell at this point. But when you ask this question, I think about a colleague who lost dozens of members of her family in a single airstrike in Beit Lahia. I think about a colleague who sent their families south because they believed it would be safer in the so-called humanitarian zone, and their family members were killed in airstrikes upon arrival. And I think about the children of my colleagues who tell me that they can't sleep at night if they can't hear the sound of surveillance drones overhead anymore, which just indicates how long this has been going on and how horrific it is.
Thank you. Clemence.
Yeah, I mean, as Gavin mentioned, I think as you talk to more people, there are more horrific story. I think right now what is extremely difficult for everyone is the crush of hope. I like among my colleagues, they were trying to be optimistic, because I think that's also what fuels you and what keeps them ongoing. Like blockade was already difficult, and now like when I was in Gaza, we had some colleagues living around. We spent the night all together, just looking at the news and being in complete disbelief that was going to be what we were going to live through the day all over again. We had share guest houses with colleagues with their children. So yeah, thinking of them, I don't know, like the older one must be 10, the smallest one is a bit more than 6 months old. Has only known the war, haven't done anything to deserve that, and has been going already through displacement and going back to the north. And I mean, right now people are exhausted and they are terrified to have to move again. I don't think they have the strength to do it again. And the high risk for now is that people will not obey to the forced displacement order, and we know what it means. It means that they will be considered as combatant and they will be shot at. But it's just they don't have the strength to move again, which I completely understand. They have exhausted all their coping strategy.
Thank you. Asil?
Well, I don't know where to start. One of the hardest things was to tell my colleague who lost her son, send her the warm condolences. But one of the stories that struck me the most was one of our EMT doctors at Al Nasser Hospital. I think it was in January last year. And they were working with local doctors in the hospital, and then a surge of influx of injuries came, and the doctor was surprised that his whole family were killed in an airstrike. And I remember the EMT doctor sharing voice notes telling us how devastated the look at the doctor's face when he learned that he lost his whole family, and he just, I don't know, saw them in the emergency room. So to be honest, the stories are endless and they're horrific, and you don't know where to start, and I don't even want to remember.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Feroz, you'll be going back to the States in next month, and telling people about the situation. How will you be highlighting that? What sort of example will you give to people to tell them exactly what is needed and how much people need to help here?
Yeah, I would actually just change it a little bit. I would say people don't need help here. We just need to stop destroying this place. But but aside from that, I think there's two things that I would highlight in terms of that have been handed their child, including by me, have been handed their child. I'm talking about 3, 4, 5-year-olds, probably even younger. And the kid is still breathing, like they have agonal breathing. And we've been told that there is no way to save this child in a mass casualty event. I'm sorry. Please take the child over there to the area where children die quietly and slowly with their family members. I did that twice, 2 days ago, in the span of 5 minutes to the same family. That is not something that a parent should. The second little boy, he had a devastating brain injury. He had been eviscerated. He was about a 4 or 5-year-old boy. When I told his dad, and his dad was more stoic about it, when his mother came into the room, she just, who can blame her? She lost her mind. She started hitting the father, grabbing the baby, trying to put him back on the stretcher, and it's.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think we just lost Dr. Feroz. I think the connection there was going down. I think we just lost him in the middle of that absolutely heartbreaking story. I'd just like to say thank you very much to everybody for joining us today. We've come to the end. We will be sending out a recording of this session. I thank you very much to all of our panelists, to Clemence, to Asil, Dr. Feroz, to Alex, to Dr. Abu Jamir, and to Gavin as well. Just hearing from you, I think we all go away and think it makes us even feel even harder about what's happening in Gaza. Thank you very much, everybody, for sharing your thoughts and your experience as well. And as I say, the recording of this session will be sent around afterwards. And any queries, please do get in touch with us. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.